For decades, James Garner was Hollywood's quiet rebel. On screen, he was witty, magnetic, and endlessly watchable. Off-screen, he was modest, blunt, and uninterested in the politics that swallowed so many of his peers. He was respected for being straightforward, the rare star who refused to play the game. But there was one story he never told. One name that seemed to harden his expression whenever it was mentioned: Doris Day. To moviegoers, they were perfect together. In the 1960s, they lit up romantic comedies like The Thrill of It All and Move Over Darling. Their chemistry was effortless, their timing sharp, their banter warm and playful. Fans adored them, convinced that what they saw on screen reflected a genuine bond off it. But that illusion was far from the truth. Garner carried a secret, one he refused to share for decades. Not about money, not about stardom, but about betrayal. A silence that cut so deep he could never quite forgive it. At 85, he finally admitted what many had long suspected. His confession stunned those closest to him and cast a new, darker shadow across one of Hollywood's most beloved screen pairings. In the early 1960s, Doris Day was at the peak of her career. She had already become America's sweetheart, box office royalty, whose wholesome charm made her the antidote to a rapidly changing decade. Studios paired her with Rock Hudson and Cary Grant, crafting comedies that balanced flirtation with innocence. To millions, she was untouchable, a beacon of optimism in an industry built on illusion. James Garner, by contrast, came from television. He had built his reputation on Maverick, a witty Western series that showcased his dry humor and understated strength. But in those days, TV stars weren't always welcomed onto the big screen. Garner fought to prove himself, and his transition to film roles was watched with skepticism by the Hollywood establishment. When he was cast opposite Doris Day in The Thrill of It All, some doubted whether he could match her likeness. Instead, the opposite happened. Their chemistry was instant, their comedic rhythm so sharp it seemed almost natural. The film was a runaway success. Audiences fell in love with their pairing, and studios rushed to capitalize. Garner and Day became the latest dream duo, packaged as if their partnership off-screen mirrored the perfection fans saw in theaters. But behind the carefully staged photographs and cheerful interviews, differences lingered. Garner was unpolished, uninterested in maintaining a spotless image. He valued honesty and often said what others were afraid to. Doris Day, meanwhile, was a carefully curated creation of the studio system. Every smile, every word, every anecdote in interviews was managed to maintain her spotless reputation. For a while, they kept up appearances. Publicly, they played the part of charming co-stars. Privately, Garner grew uneasy. In his journals, he described Day's charm as calculated, noting how she could shift between vulnerability and control in ways that felt rehearsed. He found it hard to reconcile the woman in front of him with the public darling he saw splashed across magazines. To friends, his discomfort was obvious. Garner was known for getting along with nearly everyone, from directors to fellow actors. Yet when Doris Day's name came up, his tone changed. He grew quieter, almost guarded. Something about their working relationship unsettled him, and though he rarely voiced it aloud, his restraint said more than words. The breaking point came during the filming of Move Over Darling. Garner, true to form, insisted on performing many of his own stunts. It was part of his ethos. He believed authenticity mattered, that audiences could tell when an actor truly committed. By then, he had already built a reputation as someone willing to risk discomfort for the sake of realism. One particular scene called for physical comedy: a bathtub, a slippery floor, and a fall that was meant to get laughs. On paper, it was harmless slapstick. In practice, it turned dangerous. During filming, Garner slipped harder than intended. Instead of a staged tumble, he hit the ground awkwardly, dislocating his shoulder and tearing ligaments. The set descended into chaos. Crew members rushed in, cameras were cut, and production ground to a halt. Garner lay in visible agony, unable to move, the pain shooting through his body. Everyone expected concern from his co-star. After all, they had been packaged as partners, friends, equals. But according to Garner, what came instead was indifference. He later wrote about the moment with brutal clarity. "I was lying on the floor in pain, unable to move my shoulder, and I remember looking up and seeing Doris just standing there. Nothing in her eyes, no concern, no reaction. For him, it was more telling than any line of dialogue or studio press release. Some crew members said she turned away, others claimed she froze. Whatever the explanation, Garner saw only coldness. In that moment, his trust fractured. The woman who charmed the world had shown him, he believed, a very different side. He eventually healed from the injury, but the deeper wound was emotional. To him, Day's reaction had stripped away the illusion of warmth that surrounded her public image. Afterward, their working relationship became stiff, professional but hollow. They smiled for cameras, delivered their lines, and sold the fantasy. But once the director yelled "cut," a distance lingered. Garner, usually relaxed and personable on set, pulled back. Doris, for her part, never acknowledged the moment. To Garner, that absence confirmed what he feared. Their bond had never been real at all. That single fall on a slippery floor did more than hurt his body. It reshaped his view of Doris Day forever and left a wound that no performance could disguise. Despite the tension, Hollywood wasn't ready to let go of the profitable pairing. Their first two films had been commercial hits, and in an era when studios leaned heavily on star chemistry, the idea of a third collaboration was irresistible. Executives believed another romantic comedy with Garner and Day would be a guaranteed success. Garner himself agreed. Whatever discomfort he felt privately, he understood the value of their on-screen magic. He signed on to a new project, optimistic that lightning might strike a third time. He even championed Doris for the role, believing their combined names would ensure box office strength. For him, it was about professional pride, about proving that his career, once doubted by Hollywood elites, could stand alongside the biggest stars of the era. Then, without warning, Doris Day withdrew. There was no explanation, no phone call, no acknowledgement of Garner's investment in the project. She simply stepped away, leaving producers scrambling and Garner blindsided. For a man who prided himself on straightforwardness, the void was devastating. Insiders whispered about the reasons. Some claimed Day had been offered a more lucrative deal elsewhere. Others believed she was eager to pivot away from Garner entirely, worried that too many pairings with him might typecast her. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. Garner felt humiliated, left holding the weight of a project that collapsed before it even began. To those close to him, this was the moment that turned a professional strain into something more personal. Garner had tolerated the distance after his injury, but he had still trusted her as a colleague. To be abandoned without even the courtesy of a conversation cut deeper than any physical wound. The press never knew the full story. Studios buried the cancellation under the vague excuse of creative differences. To audiences, it was a minor blip in the careers of two beloved stars. But to Garner, the incident confirmed a truth he had long suspected. The woman celebrated as loyal and warm could also be ruthlessly self-protective when it suited her. Years later, when asked if he would ever work with Doris Day again, Garner's answer was uncharacteristically blunt. Once was enough. For a man remembered for his easy humor and generosity, those words landed like a thunderclap. They revealed just how deeply the disappointment had scarred him, and how determined he was never to put himself in that position again. If the abandoned project left Garner shaken, what came next solidified his disillusionment. In 1976, Doris Day released her autobiography, a glossy, best-selling memoir that promised to reveal the woman behind the smile. Fans rushed to read it, eager for stories about her life, her marriages, and her legendary co-stars. The book delivered warmth, charm, and vulnerability. She wrote affectionately about Rock Hudson, Cary Grant, and even minor figures who had crossed her path. She recounted challenges and moments of triumph, weaving a narrative that protected her image while appearing candid. For her fans, it was everything they wanted, a chance to believe they knew the real Doris Day. But for James Garner, the memoir was another wound. In more than 300 pages, he was mentioned only briefly. A flattering line here, a polite acknowledgement there, but no depth, no shared stories, no recognition of the films that had cemented their screen partnership. To Garner, the omission was deafening. Privately, he was furious. Friends recalled how he felt erased, airbrushed out of her history, as though their collaborations had never mattered. For a man who had invested himself in making those films succeed, who had carried injuries and private disappointment in silence, it was more than an oversight. It was, in his eyes, deliberate. The contrast became starker years later, when Garner published his own autobiography. Unlike Day, he did not skirt the truth. He dedicated a chapter to her, describing their chemistry on screen as real but admitting their connection off-screen was strained. He did not write with venom, but with honesty. The warmth that audiences saw, he explained, was largely a product of professionalism. Behind the curtain, he never felt he truly knew her. The difference between their accounts could not have been clearer. Day's book presented a fairy tale carefully edited to maintain her image. Garner's revealed fractures and disappointments, acknowledging the complexity Day's memoir refused to touch. To readers, the juxtaposition was jarring. To Garner, it was confirmation that she had chosen to rewrite history by omission. What stung most was not just that Day had minimized his role, but that she had chosen to elevate others instead. Rock Hudson, Cary Grant, even actors who had worked with her only once received pages of glowing recollections. Garner, who had starred opposite her in two of her most iconic films, became little more than a footnote. He saw it as deliberate erasure, and it cut deeper than words of criticism ever could. For a man who valued honesty above all else, Day's silence on the page was as loud as the silence she had given him in life. It confirmed what he had long believed. The Doris Day the world adored was not the Doris he had known. By the late years of his life, James Garner had become one of the most respected figures in Hollywood. He carried himself with the same understated dignity he had shown for decades. Unlike so many of his peers, he avoided scandal, rarely criticized others publicly, and was beloved by co-stars for his humor and generosity. For many, he was proof that a leading man could succeed without arrogance. That's why what he finally said at 85 caught everyone off guard. In an interview that was meant to be a gentle retrospective on his career, Garner was asked casually about his work during the golden age of romantic comedies. Doris Day's name came up, as it inevitably did. For a moment he paused. Then came the words that stunned even his closest friends. "I never truly forgave her." It wasn't said with bitterness or anger. His tone was quiet, almost reflective, but the weight of the admission was unmistakable. For decades he had avoided saying more than polite remarks. And now, at the very end of his journey, he let the truth slip out. He explained that his resentment was not just about the shoulder injury on Move Over Darling, or the abandoned project that collapsed without warning, or even the memoir that had reduced him to a footnote. It was about something deeper: trust. He had trusted Doris Day to be the partner the world believed her to be, both on screen and off. When she failed him in moments of vulnerability, he could not forget. When she erased him from her story, he could not forgive. Garner admitted he had carried the disappointment longer than he should have. "We had a chance to be something great," he reflected, "not just on screen but maybe even off it. But she closed that door and I never got to ask why." It was a haunting confession, not the fiery feud tabloids often invent, but something quieter and far more human. It revealed a man who had lived with unanswered questions, who had endured a silence that felt like betrayal. Fans who heard the words were divided. Some defended Doris Day, suggesting she froze in difficult moments or had her own reasons for avoiding Garner. Others sympathized with him, recognizing in his disappointment the universal pain of trust broken and never restored. What made it sting even more was that Doris never responded. By then she had retreated from public life, devoting herself to animal welfare and avoiding the spotlight. Whether she even knew of Garner's words remains unclear. When she passed in 2019, the world mourned her as a radiant icon of Hollywood's golden age. Garner had already left the stage 5 years earlier, taking with him the confession that revealed a side of their partnership fans had never seen. Their films remain timeless, still celebrated for their charm and laughter. But for those who know the truth, the light-hearted banter now carries an undercurrent of something else, the knowledge that behind those smiles lingered a distance neither star ever closed. James Garner's confession at 85 was not about scandal nor revenge. It was about disappointment, the quiet heartbreak of realizing that someone you admired was not who the world believed them to be. Doris Day never acknowledged the hurt, and Garner never received the closure he wanted. Together they gave audiences joy, But behind the screen, their partnership became a reminder that even Hollywood's brightest legends could leave wounds that never truly healed. For more emotional stories, check out this video.